Last time, we asked a question underneath a game, Black Card Revoked. And I told you that the game was funny, the humor is real, the shared recognition, the way a whole room can laugh at that phrase because everybody knows exactly what it means. That's real. That's culture doing what culture does. That's a community that has enough shared history to make jokes about its own internal weather. But underneath the laugh was a test. A test with content. A test with a grading key. A test with a proctor. Mostly invisible, but always present. And I asked you to think about who built the test. Who decided what's on it? Who decided who passes and who gets the card pulled? We traced the quiz. We went from the institution, power, normalization, Foucault's panopticon dressed in community clothing, all the way into the house, into the living room, into the family reunion, into the thing you say to your cousin before you even think about it. We named it through Baldwin and Fanon and Du Bois. We named it through the 13 forms the invisible proctor takes. Through language and music and hair and colorism and trauma performance and respectability politics. And we ended with Dick Gregory and Richard Pryor and Paul Mooney, who diagnosed the same thing the philosophers diagnosed, but delivered it in a way that made you laugh before you realized you were bleeding. That was episode 1. This is episode 2. And here's the thing that episode 1 left sitting on the table, the thing I want to pick up right now before we go any further. Knowing that the test exists doesn't always stop it from running. We can talk theory all day. We can use words like essentialism and social construction and double consciousness, and everyone nods. And then somebody's playlist walks into the room. Somebody's accent walks into the room. Somebody's partner walks into the room, and suddenly everybody has a measuring tape. Everybody has an opinion about who's real. Why does this happen? Why does the mechanism keep running even after we've named the mechanism? That's the question this episode is built around. We're going to talk about tribalism, not as an insult, as a precise description of a human impulse that serves us until it doesn't. We're going to talk about totemism, what happens when a cultural symbol becomes a passport, and what happens to the person who arrives at the gate without it. We're going to talk about socio-cultural essentialism, the belief that there is one core blackness, one real script, one authentic set of coordinates, and if your life doesn't match them, you're somehow outside the community. And then, my favorite part, we're going to get into receipts. What if you don't play spades? What if you didn't pledge? What if you can't dance on command at a family function? We're going to get into it. And we're going to end, the way episode 1 ended, in the body, in the nervous system, in what all this actually costs, physically, when you carry it long enough. Then we're going to land in the livable world, in Lewis Gordon, in what Fanon's prayer becomes when it stops being an abstraction and becomes a daily practice. Let's dig in. Welcome to Brain Boogerz. I'm MJ, and I'm glad you're here. Whether you just came from episode 1, or you're dropping in for the first time. Quick orientation, if this is your first time, this is a long-form audio essay on Black identity, belonging, and the question, am I Black enough? We borrow from philosophy, history, comedy, and everyday life. We are not a lecture, we are a conversation. And we are always in dig mode, discovery, introspection, and growth. A brief care note, this episode gets specific about the psychology and sociology of identity, the way we inherit systems we didn't build, the way we police each other, and what it costs the body to hold all of that. Same territory as episode 1, with more precision and more depth. If at any point you need to pause, breathe, step back, and come back, do that. Your peace is the priority. This content will be here when you return. Practical matters. If you haven't subscribed, please do that wherever you're listening. Share the show with someone who's been sitting with these questions. And if episode 1 landed for you, leave a review, send it to somebody. That's genuinely how independent shows survive and find the people who need them. Alright, let's go. I promised you I'd bring in some Western philosophical tools, and I'm a person of my word. Let me give you 3 quickly, 1 idea each, 1 application each, and then we're going to move. Sartre, the look. Jean-Paul Sartre gives us language for the moment you feel yourself turning into a thing. He calls it the look. That experience of being seen by someone else and suddenly becoming hyper-aware of yourself as an object in their field of vision. You were just existing, walking, thinking, being, and then you notice the eyes, and something shifts. You're no longer a person moving through space, you're a representation. You're not MJ, you're a black man in a hoodie. You're not a teenager, you're a threat. You're not a woman, your attitude. The look turns you from subject to object in a moment, and you feel it in your body before you can name it in your mind. And once you've been turned into an object enough times, once the look has landed enough times in enough different rooms, your body starts anticipating it. You start pre-objectifying yourself before the eyes arrive. That's where the performance begins. That's where the anxiety lives. Not because you're weak, because your body learned a pattern and the pattern was accurate. Hegel, recognition. Hegel, and this is going to be fast because Hegel is genuinely not someone you want to spend a lot of time with without preparation, gives us the concept of recognition. The idea that human beings need to be seen as fully human by other human beings. Not merely tolerated, not accommodated, seen. Recognized in the full complexity of what they are. When recognition is conditional, when you are only acknowledged as fully human if you perform the right version of yourself, if you answer the quiz correctly, if you produce the right receipts, your identity starts to feel like a moving target. You stop asking, who am I, and start asking, what do they need me to be so that I don't get punished? And that is not identity, that is a hostage negotiation. Black thought pushes Hegel further, because Hegel never had to negotiate his humanity with the world he was born into. Recognition cannot just mean being politely included in someone else's framework, it has to mean being seen without having to shrink, translate, entertain, or become useful to somebody else's comfort. That's the version Hegel didn't write, but Du Bois did, and Baldwin did, and Fanon did. So we have it. Heidegger and thrownness. Heidegger gives us one last word, and it's useful even if Heidegger himself was a complicated and at times quite terrible person. Thrownness. The idea that you did not choose the world you were born into. You were thrown into it. You woke up inside a history, inside categories, inside a country with specific structures and specific laws and specific ways of seeing certain bodies. And none of that was your decision. When you feel pressure to be black the right way, part of what you're feeling is the weight of a world you did not author. You're feeling the thrownness, the fact that you arrived inside a set of conditions you had no hand in creating. Naming that matters. It interrupts shame. Because if you woke up inside a world that has already made certain decisions about what you are, then the limitations you carry are not personal failures. They're structural inheritances. They're conditions of your thrownness. That is genuinely important to understand. But Black philosophy refuses to stop there. Yes, you wake up inside a world you did not choose, but you're also responsible. And this is where freedom lives. For what you build, what you protect, what you repair, and what you refuse inside that world. Thrownness explains where you started. It does not determine where you go, and it does not excuse what you maintain. You ever notice how identity debates get very intellectual very quickly? Right up until somebody's actual body walks into the room. We can talk theory all day. We can use words like essentialism and social construction and intersectionality, and everybody's nodding, very serious, very academic. And then hair walks in, skin walks in, voice walks in, playlist walks in. And suddenly, everybody becomes a scientist. Everybody has a measuring tape. Everybody has a rubric. The body and its tastes and its accent and its neighborhood and its childhood become the Scantron. and somebody picks up the grading key. I want to name 3 forces that keep this particular flavor of Black Card Revoked alive. Even when we know, intellectually, logically, historically, that blackness is bigger than any one script. Because knowing doesn't always stop the mechanism from running. You have to know what the mechanism is before you can decide whether to run it. Tribalism. Tribalism is not an insult. It's a description. It's the human impulse to sort people into us and them, and it runs in every culture, every century, every social context. It's not pathology. It's biology, psychology, and history operating together. When people feel threatened, uncertain, or unseen, the nervous system reaches for a group identity that feels solid. Something that says, these people are mine. I know how to read them. I know what the rules are. I know I'm safe here. Inside Black communities, where the outside world is already measuring and sorting and making judgments, tribalism can show up as, if you're one of us, you'll know this. If you're one of us, you'll talk like this. If you're one of us, you'll recognize this reference, this pain, this way of moving through the world. The test becomes a belonging signal, a way of confirming that you're inside the circle. It's not always cruelty. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's the specific kind of protection that forms in communities that have been under pressure for a long time. But the cost of tribalism is that the tribe starts confusing similarity with belonging. And those are not the same thing. You can be utterly different from everyone in the room and still belong. But tribalism can't see that. Tribalism needs legibility. Totemism. Totemism is what happens when a group takes certain symbols, objects, rituals, styles, references, and practices, and treats them as sacred markers of identity. The totem is the thing that proves you belong. It doesn't have to be a carved wooden object. In this context, the totems can be the right music, the right slang, the right hair, the right church background, the right struggle story, the right political position, the right neighborhood credentials. Any of these can become sacred. And here's the mechanism. Once a totem becomes sacred, it stops being a preference and becomes a passport. You're no longer asking yourself, does this feel true to me? Does this practice nourish something real in my life? You're asking, does this prove I belong? That's how you get people treating culture like evidence in a courtroom. Like blackness is something you can authenticate with receipts. Like every album you haven't heard is a gap in your life. Like every tradition you don't participate in is a missing stamp in your passport. The totem was always a cultural choice. The moment it becomes a test, it becomes something else. It becomes a mechanism for exclusion dressed as a mechanism for connection. And then there is socio-cultural essentialism, the belief that a group has one core essence that all real members share. The idea that there is a true blackness, one personality type, one sound, one set of interests and attitudes and behaviors. And if you don't match it, you're an imposter, or at best an edge case. At worst, a betrayer. Essentialism is seductive because it makes identity feel simple. Here's what we are. Here's what we're not. Here is the line. That kind of clarity is genuinely comforting when the world is complicated and hostile. But essentialism also makes identity fragile, because now everybody is one wrong answer away from being exiled, one wrong playlist, one wrong relationship, one wrong pronoun, one wrong accent from being out. And essentialism is how stereotypes sneak in through the back door, because once you believe there's one real blackness, it becomes easier to accept a narrow script, even a script that was shaped by a system that needed Black people legible, manageable, and predictable. This is where Foucault becomes personal. In part 4, we said, power shows up as systems deciding what counts as normal, rewarding the performance of that normal, and eventually getting you to watch yourself and enforce your own compliance. What we've just described with tribalism, totemism, and essentialism is that same mechanism, but running inside the community. The script was handed to us from outside, and then we took it home and started grading each other with it. Paulo Freire called this the internalization of the oppressor, when the measuring system moves from the institution into the mind, and the mind starts doing institutional work without being asked. The system doesn't need to show up anymore. You've absorbed it. The most efficient prison is the one you maintain yourself, which means the most powerful act of freedom is noticing you're holding the lock. All right, so let me get practical for a minute and talk about receipts. What if you don't play spades? Some of y'all treat spades like it's the Constitution, like there's an amendment. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of spades, and all black people shall know the rules before their 18th birthday. And I love us for that, genuinely. The spades table is one of the great social institutions in Black American life. The trash talk alone is its own art form. But spades isn't blackness. It's a tradition in some Black spaces. An old tradition, a beloved tradition, a tradition I'm not trying to disrespect, but a tradition, not a birthright test. What if you didn't attend an HBCU? HBCUs are powerful institutions born out of exclusion, built during a time when most universities refused to admit Black students, and built with ingenuity and sacrifice and love into spaces that became homes, that became pipelines, that became sites of intellectual and cultural formation that the country benefited from even while it refused to fund them properly. That history is real and it matters. But not everyone had access. Not everyone had the money or the grades or the geographic proximity or the safety to get there. The institution's value doesn't create a membership hierarchy for the people who couldn't attend. What if you didn't pledge? What if you don't go to fish fries? What if you can't dance on command? If you can't dance, you're not a traitor, you're just stiff. And even stiffness is not a moral category. Let me do a quick call and response with myself. I've had these conversations. They go like this. But MJ, if you don't do any of that, what are you? Still Black. Okay, but if you don't know the words, you can learn the words. But you shouldn't have to bleed on command to prove you belong. Those things, spades, fish fries, HBCUs, pledging, the specific music, the specific church traditions, those can be real culture and real community. They can carry genuine memory and genuine meaning and genuine warmth. They can be beautiful. I'm not asking you to abandon them. I'm asking you to notice the moment they stop being an invitation and become a passport. Because once a memory becomes a passport, the question changes. It stops being, does this feel true to me? And starts being, do I qualify? And if you've ever felt shame because you didn't have one of those receipts, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not failing Blackness. You're bumping into somebody's local definition and somebody's nostalgia. And nostalgia is not a DNA test. But, and I want you to sit with this but because it's important, let me argue against myself from the other direction. Let me give you the Black Studies pushback because it deserves to be heard at full strength. MJ, be careful. If you critique tribalism, totemism, and essentialism too hard, you might accidentally flatten the protective function of culture. Some of what looks like a purity test is actually an archive. Spades at the family gathering, church rhythms and foodways, hair practices and naming traditions, call and response in the music, migration stories and neighborhood codes. These hold memory when formal institutions refuse to hold us, when schools wouldn't teach our history, when libraries wouldn't stock our books, when the country's official story had no room for us. Our cultural practices were the library. If we throw away every symbol because someone weaponized it, we may lose the very language that helped us remain a people across centuries of pressure to disappear. And a Black Studies critique would also say, Oppression is not just misunderstanding, it is material. It lives in housing and wages and schools and policing and healthcare and land and inheritance and the distribution of safety and the distribution of danger. If an episode like this leans too hard into the psychology of performance, into who's running what test in whose head, it could understate the structures that make performance necessary in the first place. The nervous system is doing math because the world keeps sending bills. That's not just a mindset problem, that's an economic problem, a political problem, a centuries-deep structural problem. And without accountability, and this is the harder part, Blackness is spacious can become a way to avoid obligation, to community, to history, to those still carrying the heaviest consequences of anti-Blackness. The answer is not a smaller cage, but it is also not a borderless identity with no responsibility. So the sharper landing is this. We don't need to destroy Black cultural boundaries. We need to ask honestly and without defensiveness whether those boundaries are serving life or serving fear. Are they helping us remember, protect, and organize, or are they helping us exile each other? Are they a home, or have they become a courtroom? That's the difference between culture as shelter and culture as surveillance. And it's a distinction we have to make in real time. In each specific space, with each specific tradition, there's no general answer. There's only the question asked repeatedly with honesty. Thomas Sowell would walk into this room at some point because someone always brings up Thomas Sowell and make a point about culture, incentives, and outcomes. And you don't have to be a Sowell disciple to hear his underlying question. Who built the measuring stick and who gets hit with it? That question is worth sitting with, regardless of where you land on his conclusions. I want to bring some voices into the room. Not to outsource my thinking. I've had this conversation long enough to own my own positions, but to widen the room. Because one of the things I believe about this topic is that it requires more than one voice to hold it. So let me walk through counsel, briefly, and let each voice drop something. Paulo Freire. Oppression isn't just something done to you from the outside. It can move into you. You can start carrying the oppressor's categories in your own head, using their logic, their measurements, their definitions of who counts, and experiencing it as your own common sense. Sometimes, the proctor isn't a person. It's a program, a set of instructions that got installed and never got questioned. Carter G. Woodson, who wrote The Miseducation of the Negro in 1933, and who was so far ahead of the conversation that it's almost irritating, if a system controls how you're educated, it doesn't have to control you directly. It just waits. You'll do the policing yourself, and on each other, because the rules feel like common sense. The bars are invisible because they've been normalized. That's not weakness, that's an advanced problem, and recognizing it is the beginning of something. Frederick Douglass, who understood that literacy was a key, and that the system knew it was a key, which is why it treated that key as contraband for Black people. When somebody says, "You speak white," what I hear underneath it is a fight over who's allowed to hold keys, who's allowed to sound legitimate, who's allowed to occupy the rooms that literacy opens. And the answer? Douglass's answer, earned through specific cost, was that those keys belong to whoever can use them. James Baldwin on love. And I want to slow down here because this is the part of the episode where the alternative to the quiz gets named clearly. Baldwin said, in various forms and various essays and interviews throughout his life, that love is not sentimental. Love is not a warm feeling or a performance affirmation. Love is the will to see someone clearly, including the parts that are complicated, the parts that are still becoming, the parts that don't yet have a name, and to stay. Not to fix, not to contain, not to grade, to stay. In the context of this episode, the alternative to the quiz is love. Not the quiz with better questions, not the quiz administered with more kindness. Love, which is rigorous enough to see someone fully in their complexity and their history and their becoming without reaching for the scorecard. That is harder than passing a test. It costs more than knowing the right songs. And it is, I believe, the only answer to the question this episode has been asking that is worth giving. Langston Hughes, I too. Belonging without permission, not a quiz, an assertion, not a request to be included, a statement of fact. I too am American. You don't have to grant it, I already know it. That's not arrogance, that's clarity about what was always already true. Benedict Anderson, who wrote about nations as imagined communities, not imaginary like fake, but imagined like we decide together that we belong to each other. The belonging is a practice, a choice, a relationship we keep building. And some of what we call blackness is blood and history, yes, and some of it is a relationship. A belonging we're still constructing. Something we build in every conversation, every space, every moment we choose to see each other fully. Adam David Thomason's concept of permission to be black. We don't need permission to be ourselves. And we don't have to let the last 400 years be our entire origin story. Blackness isn't only what happened to us, it's also what we were before, and what we're still becoming. That becoming is ongoing, it's not finished, and nobody else gets to decide when it's done. And Richard Pryor, who comes back here because he lived this as well as he theorized it. What this episode is asking of all of us, not just to know the philosophy, but to let experience update it. To be willing, like Pryor was in 1979, to go somewhere that changes your framework, to come back and tell the truth about what you saw. Even if it costs you something, even if it means saying publicly that something you built part of your life around was worth setting down. Let me land this in the body, because this is where Fanon's prayer becomes practical, not just philosophical. Oh my body, make of me always a man who questions. That is not a motivational poster, that is not an abstraction, it's a direct address to the body, to the nervous system, to the scan, to the math that runs before you decide anything consciously. It's asking the body to choose curiosity over clarification, to stay in question rather than retreating to the safety of the inherited answer. The body's first job is survival, not inquiry. When you've walked into enough rooms and felt the grade, the once-over, the slight pause in conversation, the repositioning of someone's body away from yours, the performance of comfort that doesn't feel quite comfortable, your nervous system learns. It stores the pattern. It begins running the calculation before you've consciously decided anything. Before you've formed a thought, the body has already assessed the room and prepared a response. That is not weakness, that is pattern recognition. That is your body doing exactly what bodies are designed to do, protect you. But Fanon's point, and the point of this entire episode, is that you don't have to let the pattern have the final word. You can notice the math, you can name the math, and then you can ask, whose equation is this? Did I write it? Or did somebody else hand it to me, and I've been carrying it ever since? For the listener who has felt their chest tighten in a room full of their own people, who has felt their stomach drop when someone said, "You're not really black," or "You're not really from here," or "You think you're better than everybody," that is not just feelings. That is your nervous system responding to the possibility of exile. Humans are wired for belonging at a biological level. When belonging feels conditional, even in a community space, even in a space that's supposed to be yours, the brain hears, this can be revoked. And the body responds to that the same way it responds to any other threat. It gets smaller, it gets careful, it gets managing. So you monitor, you perform, you pre-explain, You overprove. You arrive with your evidence already organized, your answers already prepared, your defense already drafted for a trial nobody has officially announced. And then you go home exhausted. Genuinely, deeply, physiologically exhausted. And you can't quite explain to anyone outside the experience why a cookout required recovery. This is not only identity talk. This is body talk. This is nervous system talk. This is a question about what conditions make it possible for Black people to simply breathe without auditioning, without preparing a defense, without running the math. Just breathe. I want to be clear about what I'm not saying, because I'm aware this episode covers a lot of ground, and I want to make sure I don't leave behind any misreadings I could have corrected. I am not saying Black culture doesn't matter. It does, enormously. It's one of the richest cultural traditions in human history, and it matters not because of what it survived, but because of what it created and kept creating in the face of extraordinary pressure. I am not saying there are no shared Black experiences. There are. They're real, they're significant, and they create genuine bonds across distances and generations and differences. I'm not saying history is irrelevant to who we are. History is not the past. History is living in us right now, in our nervous systems, in our families, in our institutional relationships, in our material conditions. The past is present. What I am saying is this: when Blackness becomes a test, a standardized exam with a fixed answer key and a proctor with the authority to fail you, that test is almost always doing the work of power. When we internalize that test and start administering it to each other, we start policing each other under the guise of protecting the tribe. And what we're actually doing is repeating the gaze that was aimed at us from outside. Culture can be shelter without becoming a cage. Tradition can be memory without becoming a weapon. Accountability can exist without turning belonging into surveillance. These distinctions are not comfortable, but they are necessary. And this episode has been an attempt to name them clearly enough that you can feel the difference. Not just know it theoretically, but feel it when you're in the room. So let me bring this home, because this episode has been a long ride, and I want to tell you exactly what I think it adds up to. Black philosophy does not give this episode the answer, be yourself. That's too thin. That's advice that fits on a bumper sticker and changes nothing about the room you have to walk into. Black philosophy asks a harder question. What world made it so difficult to be yourself in the first place? That question changes the scale. It moves the problem from the individual to the structure. It means that the answer is not just personal, it's also political, historical, and relational. Du Bois names the split: the part of you that's living your life and the part of you that's watching yourself be watched, grading your own performance against a standard the world imposed. Fanon names the body: skin, voice, hair, and presence loaded with meaning before the person gets to open their mouth. Hooks names belonging: not sameness, not performance, not cultural conformity, but community strong enough, intentional enough, honest enough to hold difference. And Lewis Gordon names freedom, not as a fantasy or a philosophical abstraction, but as a practical project, making a world where Black being does not have to stand trial before it can simply exist. That is why tribalism, totemism, and socio-cultural essentialism matter in this conversation. They're the names of what happens when a wounded people tries to protect belonging with shortcuts, tries to make belonging legible through performance requirements, because legibility feels safer than the vulnerability of genuine connection. These are understandable impulses. They come from real fear and real love. But Black philosophy offers a better ending than either the cage or the chaos. Remember the history, but do not let history become a jailer. Honor the culture, but do not turn culture into a courtroom. Protect the people, but do not confuse protection with surveillance. Make room. And do not let roominess become an excuse to forget responsibility. Lewis Gordon says, another world has to be not just dreamed, it has to become livable. Not imagined from a comfortable distance, not philosophized about in a podcast, I'm aware of the irony, and then set aside when the episode ends. Livable, meaning built, maintained, protected. Practiced in how you talk to your cousin who does something different than you expected. Practiced in how you receive somebody whose blackness doesn't look exactly like yours. Practiced in the conscious, deliberate choice not to reach for the quiz when the room gets uncertain. Not to pick up the grading key when the air gets uncomfortable. Not to revoke the card just because you feel the old reflex. That's not a utopia. It's not naive. It's a discipline. And it starts smaller than people think. It starts with one room, one community space, one family table, one friendship, one conversation where belonging is not contingent on performance. One room where the card is never in anyone else's hands. Let me come back to where we started. Black card revoked. Somebody decided they were holding the card, and somewhere along the way, through enough measuring, enough testing, enough "are you really black enough?" enough of the quiz being administered by people who loved in spaces that were supposed to be safe, some of us agreed that they could. We treated the card like it was theirs to give, like belonging was something you earned from the outside in, rather than something you carried from the inside out. The card was never theirs to give. The card is not a playlist. It's not a hairstyle. It's not a church background or a neighborhood credential or a struggle story you can perform on command. The card is peoplehood. It is memory. It is relation and responsibility. It's the long, extraordinary, world-altering history of people who survived things no human being should have had to survive and still built art, language, philosophy, humor, food, music, mathematics, governance, and love out of the rubble, out of the hold of the ship, out of the field, out of the sharecropper's cabin, out of the redlined neighborhood, out of every space the world designated for their disappearance. They built something that the world could not look away from. You cannot feel that. You can only forget it. And forgetting is not the same as failing. You can remember. And this episode, if it did anything, if it moved anything, if it opened anything at all, I hope it was a reminder. Not a test. Never a test. A reminder that you were never auditioning. You were always ready. You were always already here. You were always already enough. You were always already home. Before I let you go, I want to give you a few questions to carry into the week. Not homework, not a quiz. Obviously not a quiz. Just some places to sit with what we talked about. Where do you feel the gaze the most? At work? In your family? At church? Online? In your own neighborhood? Not where you think you should feel it. Where do you actually feel it? Where does the performance start before you've made a conscious decision? What do you change about yourself in that space? The tone of your voice, your posture, your vocabulary, your volume, the way you dress, what you admit to knowing or not knowing? What version of yourself do you bring in, and what version stays in the car? Is that change a choice you actually like? Something that feels like range, like adaptability, like genuine fluency? Or is it a safety strategy you inherited? Something your body learned without your explicit consent? What receipt have you been asked to show? Music, slang, spades, church, neighborhood, struggle story, family background, political position? What was the thing someone needed to see before they'd let you into the circle? And how did it feel to be asked for it? And if you replaced the quiz with genuine curiosity, If the question changed from, do you qualify, to tell me about yourself, what would you ask instead? And what might you actually learn? And then the closing question, the one I want to sit in the room for a while. If you can name the proctor, do you still have to take the test? And the freedom question, the one this whole series is building toward, how do I become more fully human, more fully responsible, and more fully connected without letting fear write the definition? Take that one home. Turn it over. I'll be turning it over with you. Alright, so we're 2 episodes in, and I want to name what I think the arc is building toward, so that you can feel where we're going, because this series has a shape and I want you to be able to hold it. In episode 1, we named the test, the quiz, the proctor, the gaze, the 13 ways it moved from outside us into us, from the institution into the community, from the community into the body. We named it through Foucault and Baldwin and Du Bois. We let Gregory and Pryor and Mooney confirm it from the inside. And in episode 2, we named the engine, the tribalism, the sorting instinct that serves until it weaponizes, the totemism, the symbols that became passports and the people who got stopped at the gate, the essentialism, the one true blackness that doesn't exist but that costs people something every day as they fail to match it. We sat with the receipt segment, we widened the room with the council of voices, and we landed in the body, in what Fanon's prayer looks like when it's not a prayer anymore, but a survival practice. And the question sitting underneath both of these episodes, the one Lewis Gordon is pointing at, the one Fanon is praying for, the one that is the real subject of this entire series is this: what does it take to stop auditioning? Episode 3 is called The Body as a Scorecard, and we're going deep into embodiment, into hair, the politics of it, the history of it, the love and the violence and the grief of it, into skin tone and colorism, the light-skin, dark-skin hierarchies that run through Black communities, where they come from, and what they continue to cost. Into what it means that the body gets read before the person gets to speak, into the physical, neurological, measurable cost of performing identity in an anti-Black world, into what chronic vigilance does to the nervous system over years, over decades, over a lifetime, and into rest, into what it might feel like to move through the world when the body doesn't have to be evidence, when you're not pre-explaining yourself, when you're not proving, when you're just here. That's what episode 3 is about. So take a moment to go through the reflection prompts for this episode, and remember that they're questions, not a quiz. They're an invitation, somewhere to sit with the work we just did together and let it find the right room in you. So, thank you, genuinely, for staying curious, for not needing the easy answer, for sitting with the hard parts and not looking away. The card was never theirs to give. You were always already enough. You were always already home. Until we dig in next time through discovery, introspection, and growth, see you, get nosy, be nosy, stay nosy, and keep moving forward. I'm MJ, and this is Brain Boogerz.